Can someone also send Carla an email or Melissa with a different login? Would you need a different login for that?
Yes. Dina will do it. Mhm.
So it's KARLA.EST. You know, I'll just put it in the chat.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, so welcome everyone to this steering committee meeting. Dina, if you'd like to go ahead, do you want me to go ahead and run through the protocols?
Yeah, if you could do that, that'd be great, Georgina, and I'll
Okay.
try to get this other stuff taken care of for us.
Okay, sounds good. So with respect to interpretation services, simultaneous Spanish interpretation will be available shortly for today's webinar. Join the interpretation mode. Please select the icon that looks like a globe at the bottom of the screen. Select Spanish and mute original audio. We ask that all participants choose a preferred audio channel, either English or Spanish. If your preferred language is Spanish and you wish to provide comments in Spanish during either of the public comment periods, we ask that you please do so from the Spanish interpretation audio channel. This is a working group meeting with limited time to address a full agenda. Please keep comments concise and to the point to allow all participants equal opportunity to speak. Our co-chairs and the facilitator are here to help us keep on track and ensure that all voices are heard. So at this point, as soon as Dina's, I'm going to move through this, but at some point Dina will let us know that the Spanish interpretation channel is open for use. And then we'll come back to the instructions, this graphic, so that you can see how to get into the Spanish interpretation channel. So other webinar protocols, microphones will be automatically muted. Video will be off for all attendees. Video will remain off for public attendees even while speaking. Post general questions in the Q&A box, please. Use the raised hand function to direct a question to the speaker or the steering committee. For attendees that joined by phone, *9 is the raise hand function. Phone callers, please use *6 to unmute and mute yourself, not the mute function on your phone. There will be a public comment period at the end of the agenda. If you plan to comment, please add your name, agency, and subject matter to the Q&A box. When called upon to speak, staff will unmute your microphone, state your name, agency, organization, or special interest group if applicable. All speakers will be limited to 2 minutes. Staff will announce when your time is up and disable your microphone when your time is up. With respect to public comment, there are 2 opportunities to speak during the public comment periods today. One is at the beginning of the meeting during agenda item 2, that's public comment related to items on the agenda. And then during agenda item, I believe it's 7 or 8, public comment related items not on the agenda. If you have comments related to specific projects within neighborhoods or communities, such as desiring a roundabout at an intersection or extension of transit service in the city of Madera or Chowchilla, this is not the meeting to do that. Please direct your comments to the city of Madera or Chowchilla staff. If the specific project is outside of the city of Madera or Chowchilla, please direct your comments to county staff. MCTC staff working on the regional transportation plan will also accept project-specific comments and forward the comment to the responsible agency. Steering committee will be addressing major regional transportation projects along state highways and other major arterials that connect cities and the unincorporated communities, not specific project needs. Steering committee is a working group responsible for development of the Measure T Renewal Investment Plan. The steering committee will ultimately recommend approval of the plan to the Madera County Transportation Authority. It is the MCTA board that will take action to approve the plan and request that the Board of Supervisors place the ballot measure on the November 2022 ballot. So with that, I will turn it over to Supervisor Frazier. I believe that he is running the meeting today.
Yes, and also, during that 8, I will allow public comment on items on the agenda if there's something that is brought up during the time too. So we'll be able to do a little bit of both. And then for our introductions, we'll start with a roll call.
Would you like me to do that since Dina's busy?
Yes, please, Rose. Thank you. That would be great.
Okay. Madera District Chamber of Commerce, Debbie Bray. MVP Realty, John Reed. Red Barn Cafe, Lisa Soroyan. Southern Yosemite Visitors Bureau, Rhonda Salisbury. City of Chowchilla, Diane Palmer.
I'm here.
Thank you. City of Chowchilla, Rod Pruitt.
Here.
Thank you. City of Chowchilla, Jason Rogers.
Here.
City of Madera, Jose Rodriguez.
Here.
Thank you. City of Madera, Santos Garcia. City of Madera. I always want to say your name, Arlando, because that's my cousin.
Oh, yeah.
Arnoldo.
Yeah.
I know, I
Yeah,
know. And you're here and I see you and I apologize.
That's okay. That's okay. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
He's been called worse.
I know, it's one of those mental things with me. City of Madera, Keith, are you?
Here.
City of Madera, Alan Bitter.
Here.
Valley Children's Hospital, Tim, we've heard from you.
I'm here.
Madera County Public Health, Sarah,
Oh, Stephanie's here for Sarah.
Stephanie's here, great. Madera County Board of Supervisors, Brett is here.
Yes.
Madera County Board of Supervisors, Robert, you're here.
Yes.
Madera County Board of Supervisors, Jay Varney, are you here?
Yeah, I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you. Madera County Public Works Department, Jared Carter.
Yes, good afternoon.
Madera County Planning Department, Matt, are you here?
Present.
Great. Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability, Leticia.
Here.
Camarena Health Center, Nicole, are you here?
Yes, I'm here.
Great. Madera County Farm Bureau, Christina or Dennis. Creekside Farming,
I'm here.
great, thank you. Madera County Superintendent of Schools. Opie, are you here? Madera Community College, Dr. Reyna. Cal Fire, Matt, are you here? Caltrans, Michael Navarro. Michael Navarro's, oh, Mike Prandini's here, but he's on. Madera County EDC, Bobby, are you here?
I am.
Great, thank you. Sierra Club, Bill, are you here? MCTC staff, Patricia Taylor.
Here, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Central California Labor Council, Mike Lopez. Active Transportation Advocate, Jeffrey Wheeler.
I
It
saw
was
that
on
you-
earlier.
Yeah.
I'm here.
Okay. And then SSTAC Chair, Frank.
I'm here.
Thank you. San Joaquin Regional Rail Commission, Paul or Dan, or either one of you here?
Yeah, Dan Levitt here. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Dan. Do We have our student rep from Madera City College, Jonathan. A citizen community advocate, either Derek or Donald, or either one of you on the call today. Okay, thank you.
Yes, I think I missed the roll call. This is City Mayor of Madera, Santos Garcia.
Great, thank you, Mayor.
And
Anybody
Rose
else that I
also-
might have missed?
Yes, David Huff with the City of Madera as well.
Did you get me, Rose? Mike Prangini?
Yes, I got you, Mike, thanks.
Okay, thanks.
Well, thank you all for being here. And thank you for going through that, Rose. I'm sure you're pretty tired. You may need to take a 5-minute break after that. But appreciate everybody being here again. This is so important. So we'll move on to item 2, public comment related to items on the agenda. Are there anybody wishing to make, oh, and then I also saw that the interpretation is available now. It looks like it just opened up. So if you'd like to switch to that, it is available. I also, it looks like our interpreter is here. Do we need Carla anymore?
No, I think we're okay, Brett. Thank you so much for trying to step in with Carla. That was really nice of you.
No problem. And Carla, if you're listening, I appreciate you always being there, ready to help out. Appreciate you.
Sure.
Anytime.
We might go ahead and have Linguistica then provide this slide in Spanish so that those Spanish speakers can move over to the Spanish channel. We've already read it in English, so if you could read it in Spanish, please, that would be great.
Probably already moved over. Yeah, she moved over.
Which is already over? Okay.
Yeah.
Is there anybody on this channel? Oh, what did I do?
Can Carla do it for us?
Oh, yeah. Did she jump off?
No, I'm here.
Okay, yeah. if you
Okay,
could,
great.
This slide in Spanish, please. Sorry to put you on the spot on that one.
If you could go ahead and just read this slide in Spanish, Carla, because
Yeah.
our interpreter is already over to the Spanish channel.
No worries, no worries.
Thank you.
All right. Hay interpretación disponible en el servicio de hoy. Si usted quiere interpretación, por favor, selecciona el icono que está abajo, donde dice, donde está el mundo de interpretación. Y por favor, escoja español y póngale mute al audio original. Les pedimos a todos los participantes que escojan su audio preferido, sea en inglés o español. Si prefiere su lenguaje en español y desea proveer comentarios en español durante el comentario público, le pedimos que por favor lo haga en interpretación español en la canal de audio. Este es un grupo que está trabajando juntos con tiempo limitado para discutir toda la agenda. Por favor, comenten sus comentarios concisos y al punto que deja a los otros participantes tener la oportunidad igual para hablar. Nuestros coaches y facilitadores están aquí para ayudarnos a asegurarnos que estemos en tiempo y asegurarnos que todas nuestras voces estén escuchadas. Gracias. Thank
Thank
you.
you very
Carla.
much.
Leticia, I see your hand raised. Is this for the public comment or in regards to this?
No, it's public comics. I can wait. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so I'll give, does anybody need to move over to the other channel? Please do so now. All right, now we're public comment related to items on the agenda. Leticia?
Hi, everyone. Leticia with Leadership Council. So I just kind of want to reiterate on the aspect of outreach. Where do I start? Okay, so I saw the letter and I just kind of wanted to expand on some things. So for outreach, we feel like everything has been done over the internet, and Fraser, as you know, Lavinia doesn't have good internet connections. It's almost impossible to do it. I think when I go and do community meetings, like we work off hotspots, and that stuff can get kind of expensive for us. And so I kind of just wanted to touch on that, and that most of that outreach has been done over the internet. And as for the mailer that has been recently, or last week, I think it was barely going to be sent out, and community members should be a part of the investment plan so the investment plan can reflect their needs. And as what we've heard and what the investment plan looks like, it's very different. I also have a question about RTP. So last week there was, and hopefully MCTC, I know you all are here and maybe you can answer my question. So last week there was a workshop for the RTP. It was virtual, and we were working with residents to help them participate in this workshop. But so during the workshop, we heard that, RTP SCS informs Measure T, but the investment plan that RTP had looked very different from the Measure T. So we're kind of wondering, why that is, and maybe get some clarity on that. Yeah, and I think that's it for right now.
Okay.
Uh, Any other public comment? Seeing none, I'll call close to the public comment, and then anyone from MCTC want to take why RTP looks somewhat different from Measure T.
I can start, and then maybe Tricia can add anything I miss. This is Georgina Vivian. The Regional Transportation Plan is a long-range transportation planning document. It also includes a sustainable community strategy, which looks at it joins land use and transportation systems together to focus on reducing greenhouse gas emissions, improving air quality, improving the economy, improving health, and reducing impacts on resources such as agricultural land. So the Regional Transportation Plan receives all of its nominated projects, transportation projects, from the local agencies as well as from Caltrans. All of those projects were reflected in the project prioritization study that was commissioned by MCTC this last year. And in addition to projects received from each of the local agencies, it also includes projects that were reflected in the active transportation plan for the region, as well as the capital improvement programs for each of the local agencies as well. And so it's a one-stop shop basically for all the various different transportation improvements that are identified in the county. The Regional Transportation Plan looks at that list of projects, and it prioritizes those projects based upon a set of criteria, including location of those projects and impacts on disadvantaged communities. And it prioritizes those projects and then pulls together based upon the funding that's available over that time frame, over the 24 years of the plan. It creates a constrained project list of all modes, whether it's transit, streets and highways, et cetera, or an unconstrained list, which would inclusive of all those remaining projects that cannot be funded, and the funding sources that are known over the 24-year time frame. The Measure T process uses those same lists that are developed through the Regional Transportation Plan. So it looks at the projects to be funded that are in the constrained list or in the unconstrained list, and it identifies the funding and those projects that may be used to that may be funded with Measure T funds. Keep in mind that the Regional Transportation Plan looks at a variety of funding sources over that time frame, over the 24 years. Measure T is just one of many. We have a number of federal sources, state sources, other local funding such as developer funding, mitigation fees that are implemented by the various jurisdictions, as well as Measure T. So it's one of many. And the connection between Measure T and the Regional Transportation Plan, as I just mentioned, is through those project lists, as well as being just one of the many funding sources that Measure T, or that the Regional Transportation Plan considers. In terms of outreach, we do have our outreach team on the call today. We have an agenda item on outreach, and they're going to be taking us through exactly what outreach activities have occurred. But it's important to understand that scenarios that are being developed for the Regional Transportation Plan are inclusive of the projects that Measure T will also be financing as one of many of those funding sources that are available to MCTC. With that, I'll turn it over to Tricia, and she can add to whatever I've left out.
I'm so sorry. I'm just going to interject real quick. Before you said that the outreach is the same for the RTP and Measure T, and both of those are distinct processes. So I guess I'm wondering how, I don't understand.
I didn't say that they were the same. I said that the projects that are considered as for Measure T funding are the projects that are considered for inclusion in the Regional Transportation Plan. The outreach processes have been different, but they're also coordinated with one another. And so I think that's important. We've said that all along, that we have two different outreach activities or programs going on, one for the Measure T and one for RTP, but that they're intertwined because they're so related to each other.
Well, we brought this up before, and there's only been RTP workshops, and I think you have stated before that that same workshop works for Measure T. So I guess I'm wondering, I don't understand how that's a distinct process and how that information is being used, how there's another type, how they're coordinating if there's only one type of workshop.
Because we're asking at that same workshop what projects and programs the public is interested in, what projects they would like to see implemented or included in the Regional Transportation Plan over the next 24 years. And those are going to be the same projects that Measure T would fund. So there is a direct relationship between the two.
Okay, so and Georgina, you did an excellent job responding. You didn't leave anything out. The only thing I would add is that the comments that were received at the RTP SCS workshop have been communicated to the team.
Great.
And then so any back and forth as we do when the other outreach activity status, you can ask as a board member under 4C, even though it says 4B, but that's so. All right.
Good.
And now we'll move into item 3, Measure T renewal, staff modal allocation proposal.
Great, thanks, Brett. So we presented to you the last meeting some preliminary information that identifies what the allocations would be made to. And the first piece of information that's really important is to have a good understanding of the programs, sub-programs, and then the potential eligible projects associated with each. So we presented this, you've already approved these programs and sub-programs, but we did have, we have 4 major programs. The Community and Neighborhood Streets and Roads covers maintenance, other local road improvements. There's a flexible amount that will be allocated to local agencies and they can spend it for any transportation purpose. And then regional streets, roads, and highways. The next program is public transit, and it will cover all public transportation services. Next, we had the active transportation, which includes bicycles, pedestrians, and trail projects. And then finally, clean transportation and new technologies, which covers incentives for carpooling, charging stations, microtransit, etc. So we also presented this to you. We just wanted to provide you with just a brief recap of what we did present. We need to protect our multi-million or billion-dollar taxpayer investment that we have in terms of this communities and neighborhood street and road network, making sure that it's maintained over time. We need early investment in community neighborhood streets, roads, transportation infrastructure, lower the cost and reduce the cost of future repairs. Well-maintained streets and roads have a longer lifespan, thereby likely delaying the need for future repairs. Over 90% of Madera County's modal trips are made via auto or truck, and a well-maintained local neighborhood street and road system brings enhanced economic value to the community. We also presented first poll that was taken. There's a poll out now, or will be out early next week, our second poll. But this first poll polled all of the voters, not all of them, but a sample of voters within Madera County, throughout the county, including unincorporated communities, asking what projects were a priority to them. And you can see fixed potholes came out number 1, reducing traffic congestion, paving and maintaining local streets and roads, improving traffic flow, completing projects in their area. For the most part, they were all focused on street and road type projects and congestion, and mostly fixing and maintaining the streets and roads. That's important to have an understanding of. This table or graph shows that as you care for the street and road system and keep that system up, the cost to keep it up is very low. So if you can provide for a well-maintained system, just to maintain that in very good condition or even fair, the cost is lower than if you allow it to get so deteriorated that you can't, you have a number of potholes, its pavement condition index becomes very critical. It takes a much higher price to repair that road than it would if you maintained it over time. So at $2.50 a square yard versus $67 a square yard, it's important that we keep our system maintained and at least at a PCI of 70 or better. Keep those costs down. Even between 50 and 70, you see a cost of $20, $36 a square yard, which is very expensive. The other item that we presented is that what the percentage of trips by mode is. You can see here driving alone or sharing vehicles. Majority of the people are driving in vehicles. Transit is at a very low percentage, walking at 16%, and then biking at 2.1%. Some of the other assumptions that we mentioned is that there's been a shift in policy for funding from the federal and state governments to other modes of transportation other than streets and highways. And we think that this is really important. There will be other funding sources or a redirect of existing funding sources by the feds and the state to active transportation projects as well as transit. Now, they may be competitive, but the state has been contacted as well as the feds to ensure that they look at counties such as Madera County who have a tough time competing for such funds for streets and roads or for other modes of transportation as well. So they have been informed, and hopefully they'll be looking into how they can make, if they're going to shift their policies from streets and roads to other modes, that they make that equitable across the state. We also took you through a proposed allocation of the Measure T 3 renewal funding. You can see we have local streets and roads, the regional, active transportation, transit, maintenance, clean technology, and then admin planning. We have maintenance separated out and regional steps separated out from local streets and roads because they are critical programs, and we want to make sure that it's understood that those are critical programs under the local streets and roads category that should be emphasized. So you see the database cost by mode, and this comes from the project prioritization study that was done. You see the cost of $4.5 billion for all those projects that are included in the database. The revenues by mode, which we show 714 million, which is significantly less than what we need, which shows our unfunded need and our shortfall of 3.8 billion. percentage of unfunded need is reflected here. So it's 25% in the local streets and roads, 23 regional, 18 active, 5% transit, 28% maintenance. And of course, we didn't allocate anything here because there really isn't, there really aren't projects specified. They're for clean technology, they're spread across the other projects in the database. The percent of funding needed for Measure T then would be as noted. And what we've done here is we've assumed that one assumption is that we could allocate Measure T equally to each of the various modes. And that's what we did here. That would result in this funding allocation to each of those modes, and then the percentage allocation. Here we have shown the total program need met by non-Measure T, which would be all those other funding sources, federal, state, and local, plus Measure T funds, and they're shown here. And then that's the combination of Measure T, which is the 819 million plus the 714 million. That gives us 1.5 billion. And then the percent of project need or program need met by non-Measure T funds as well as Measure T funds. And you can see the allocation there. So based upon this information, the first alternative that we presented to you at the last meeting was an allocation to local streets and roads of 61%. That includes maintenance, 31% regional, 2.5% to active transportation, 0.5% to transit, 1.5% to clean technology, and 1.5% to administrative planning, for a total of 100%. And you can see the pie chart and how that works out to the left. This alternative is reflective of emphasizes maintenance of the existing transportation system, and also continued focus on regional streets and roads to provide connectivity between each of the incorporated and unincorporated communities throughout the county. We have also prepared another alternative, Alternative 2, and it reflects reduction in local streets and roads and regional to increase the active transportation to 4%, transit to 4%, clean technology to 3%, and of course, admin planning stays at 1.5%. So these are the two alternatives that we are presenting to the committee today. We would like to see the committee approve one of these two alternatives. The next steps in this process rely on the allocation of Measure T funds percentage-wise to each of these programs so that we can move forward with development of the investment plan. The next step in this process will be, once these allocations are approved, or some form of these allocations are approved by the committee, is to then focus on those regional projects. We don't know what the regional pot is yet because we don't have an allocation approved. So once we are able to nail down this regional pot, the next step will be to look at those regional projects that the Regional Transportation Plan and Sustainable Community Strategy is looking at, and determine how Measure T can help finance those projects. So with that, Brett, Supervisor Frazier, I will provide it back to you.
Frank, looks like you have your hand up.
There, thank you. Georgina, a question. Are we going to put an emphasis on maintaining a better than 70 PCI? Because that's the pavement condition index, because the cost even to fare is substantially higher to maintain our roads to be safe, free of potholes. And having worked in fire and EMS in the county, I can tell you that vehicles that hit a pothole on rainy roads, snow, ice, or even fog can throw the vehicle off course, and has caused an unbelievable number of accidents in this county involving injury and in case death. And I would like to encourage the committee that we need to really focus on maintaining our road pavement index, keeping the roads in a safe operating condition, and that we at least allocate enough funds for better than 70 on the PCI. Thank you.
Yes, and each of the local agencies has identified cost to achieve either a 70 PCI or a 75. I believe the city of Madera and the county of Madera had identified costs for a 75 PCI, and Chowchilla had identified a cost for a 70 PCI. As you can see here, the need is 1.3 billion. The revenues are only 242 million available to address that $1.3 billion cost. So the unfunded need is 1.1 billion almost. When you look at what Measure T can provide, we're still going to have a shortfall, even to achieve the 70 or 75 PCI. So the county and the two cities, should they receive other funding to address that shortfall, and they'll be able to achieve those PCIs. But if they can't, they're going to need as much Measure T funding as they can to help them at least maintain what they've got to some PCI level. It probably won't be at 70 or 75. And if Keith or Jason or Jared would like to further describe your needs, or Ellen Bitter from the city of Madera, please do so. Please do so now.
And also, does this include the special districts miles in there as well, with any of the funding that comes in from special district funds?
Troy, I don't believe it does. Troy, you know if the revenues by Measure T free mode includes special district funding? I don't believe it does, but
No, we don't include that. I don't have access to that data, and usually those are for private area, private roads or private area, and we usually match with the current measure. There is a maintenance district pot of money, and I know that the county has matched those with the special district funds.
I was just seeing if George, you know about how much it would be over the time under the lane miles in the and how much money is brought in by special districts or maintenance districts?
yeah, these needs are above and beyond the needs for the special districts. So this need of 1.3 billion is above and beyond what would be needed to address those special district needs.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and this is Keith with the city of Madera. Yeah, that's what we project to go ahead and get to a 75 PCI. We would of course like to go higher than that, and our aim will be to go higher than that over time. What you see there, we also do receive other funding, but the other funding will also leave us short. And these costs, it's for every street in the city of Madera, and it does vary. We do have streets that are relatively new; those have what would be considered a PCI of close to 100. But we also do have streets throughout the city that would be on the order of a PCI of less than 50, where we're pretty much in an area where we need to reconstruct the roads. I believe early on in these presentations, there were exhibits showing the cost of minor maintenance. In other words, putting oil on the surface of the roadway, going up to what's called slurry seals and the like. There we go. And then going all the way up to a point where we actually have to go ahead and replace the entire road. Our goal using these funds will be to go ahead and try to hit the roads as frequently as possible. That's sometimes a difficult thing, trying to go ahead and do a balancing act. But we will remain behind even with the funding that is shown here. I can answer detailed questions, but in general, the funding between proposed on Measure T and what we already have probably won't cut it.
And this is Jason from City of Chowchilla, and just to echo Keith, there was something that we had shared with the group a while back of those needs. I think each agency put something together on
Right.
how we got to that.
Right, and that's reflected here.
Right. But yeah, it's even with Measure T, I mean, we're still really short on funding, and it's needed just to sort of keep us going where we're at. And I think we still all showed decreases in pavement condition moving forward, even with the current funding that we have, just because there's a large gap, which makes it all the more important that we continue this going, so that way we can use it to leverage other funds.
So even if you were to take 100% of Measure T funding, which is the 866 million, there's a $46 million, these two are together, so it'd be 866 million. If you were to take the 866 million, 100% of it, and put it toward the unfunded need for maintenance, we would still be about $200 million short at 100% of Measure T money as to maintenance and nothing else. So we're going to be very short when Measure T funding is allocated to all of these other modes. Maintenance is going to be much further away from 200 million, probably more like 600 million or $700 million shortfall.
Hey, Georgina, this is Dylan too, and I just wanted to add in that this isn't really indicative of just being a problem in Madera. It's really, we see that in a lot of counties similar to Madera that have a lot of rural roadway miles and agriculture roadway miles as well to maintain. And we participate with the state for their California statewide local streets and roads needs assessment, where we see a very similar picture for counties like ours.
Correct. Good point.
Leticia, you had your hand up, and then Tim will be next.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Well, I want to start off with, I don't think residents have said that they want higher percentages in active transportation, public transportation, and this doesn't necessarily reflect that. Even 4%, the second alternative is really low. And the other thing is that, again, with like the outreach is supposed to be informing the Measure T investment plan, and it's clear that it isn't the case, because this doesn't reflect that. A lot of residents, both in Fairmead and La Viña, have advocated for more active transportation and transit transportation, and this is super low. And a lot of folks don't have trouble going from place to place and don't have reliable ways to get around. So I think definitely that's also an issue. Yeah, and I just want to kind of bring that up.
Thank you. Tim?
Thanks, Supervisor. And it's a little bit related to Leticia's question. Georgina, I was just trying to understand how you arrived at the percentages for each of those two alternatives. And you might have already mentioned it. If you did, I apologize. I'm terrible with numbers. But yeah, how did you come to those percentages? And I was particularly interested in the active transportation and the transit, since as Leticia mentioned, even that 4% in alternative 2 seems to be lower than the lowest percentage in the model you presented earlier,
Sure,
the
no
5%.
problem. So going back to this table, for the transit, you can see that the database costs are $351 million. The revenues by mode are about $149 million. The unfunded need is at $202 million. So at 5%, would be an additional funding of about 43 million that would go toward transit. And when you look at the percentage of remaining need, the percentage of program need met and unmet, transit is at the lowest at 10%. In terms of the active transportation, a lot of these other projects, maintenance, regional, and especially local streets and roads, when the local jurisdictions improve those streets and roads, whether it's adding a lane or widening the shoulder, providing for complete street, they do have complete street projects as a result, or included in the database for local streets and roads category. bikeway striping or bikeway facilities, sidewalks are included in those projects. I might ask, for instance, Ellen Bitter or Keith to explain when they make improvements on the local streets and roads, how those other modes are also accommodated.
Yeah, either of us can go ahead and do that, but when we're doing certain types of maintenance, when we're just putting, say, a slurry seal over the top of the road, that's a thicker oil. As we pass a particular percentage of the project, I'm saying that wrong. Some of those projects, by definition, we automatically start to install wheelchair ramps with those. That just by default is what we do, and that to some degree is a Caltrans requirement once you go into a certain type of maintenance. But when we build a new roadway, for instance, one of our upcoming roadways, Olive Avenue, things that we've included in there that might be considered ATP is we matter-of-factly added bike lanes into the mix with the striping and everything else, which hadn't been done previously in city projects going back probably before 10 years or so, 10 or 15 years or so. We're also adding in bus turnouts on that particular project. We are looking to go ahead and add in more of what the complete streets or ATP type needs are into our projects. So when you see local roads and streets with a database cost of 1.131 million, we have a lot of that built in. So going down to the active transportation, when it shows 4% on the alternative 2 as the example, that's 4% on top of what we already will be doing. Ellen, do you have anything else to add to that?
No, that covered it pretty well, Keith. Just anytime we're bringing a project up to a standard, whether it's a collector street or an arterial street, those projects include all of the elements in the roadway, sidewalk, bike lanes, et cetera, like Keith mentioned.
And then another important slide that is in here too, going under the other assumptions, is that the state of California and the federal transportation bill have, there it is, there's been a substantial shift changing to what they fund would be these active transportation and transit projects versus they're not giving any money to really maintain other than what we get out of SB1 and then our regular funding. So there is more money available for these things. This would just be an enhancement of those and give us some ability to do some matching funds to leverage that into larger amounts of money for these efforts.
The other reason, one of the other reasons why we prepared alternative 1 the way it's shown is that for these active transportation projects, this amount came from, there was a specific study that was done for active transportation region-wide. It was prepared by MCTC for the entire county. And it reflects all of the active transportation projects will be needed over the next 20 to 30 years. So it's very inclusive of any active transportation project out there that's needed. Whereas local streets and road projects, the regional projects, even the transit projects, maintenance projects, it was developed through the PCI. So transit, regional, and local streets and roads projects are not reflective of every project that is needed out there. They're reflective of projects that were submitted to the local agencies to fund within the next 24 years. There are a number of other projects that are in their general plan circulation elements or transportation elements that are above and beyond the projects that were submitted. So this is inclusive of every active transportation project that can be developed within the county, whereas these other categories do not reflect all of the needs that are reflected in those general plans. That's another reason. I referenced this other column over here, and I made a mistake. I was really wanting to reference this column. When you look at the percent allocation of Measure T funding, assuming that you allocate Measure T funding equally as a percentage to each of the different modes, both transit and active transportation come out the lowest between all of the other modes. So that was one of the reasons. So there were a number of different pieces of information and data that went into, factual information that went into how these allocations were derived.
Would you add any, so just looking specifically at transit then, how do you justify the 2.5% for alternative 1 and the 4% for alternative 2?
So when we looked at alternative 2, let me kind of take you through why alternative 2 was developed. We wanted to look at what makes sense in terms of implementation. How can systems address, how can they be financed over time without building up a reserve or building up the fund until it can be spent down for a major project? And for active transportation and transit, as well as clean technology, these categories are really focused on matching funds to the federal and state funds. As Supervisor Frazier just mentioned, federal and state governments are starting to allocate, they're pushing their policies toward other modes of transportation. So we do need to have at least some funds available from Measure T to match those federal and state dollars, and to help leverage other funding sources such as state and federal, as well as other local funding. So that's why there won't be funding, as Brett mentioned, for and others have mentioned, for maintain the roads, to address bridge improvements or application of median islands where they may be necessary to reduce accidents and improve safety. There won't be funding for major improvements between the communities that are going to be needed to address safety issues as well as mobility issues. And so because of that, Measure T is really one of only a few funding sources that can be used to address those two modes, whether it's local streets and roads or regional. Whereas there are a number of other funding sources that will be available for active and transit and clean technology. So these allocations are, one, to ensure that there's enough funding there, that it won't sit in a bank account. There's enough funding there to provide for matching funds and to help leverage those other dollars that are available from the federal and state governments.
And those dollars,
Troy?
that's helpful, Georgina, really quick. And those dollars that are available right now, say for active transportation and transit, how far into the future do we know that they'll continue to be available? I mean, do they have they'll be available in the next 5 years, or do we know?
Okay, so right now the state is run through, of course, the governor's office, and the governor's priorities for transportation are really focused on modes that will reduce greenhouse gases and improve air quality, et cetera. Should there be a change in policy at the governor's office or at the legislature, then I could see that there would be a change back to streets and roads. But the political climate in California is probably such that that's going to be sometime in the future, that there would be a political shift. And I would turn that over to the politicians on this committee, such as the two supervisors, as well as Tricia, to maybe elaborate on how they think policy is being directed at the state level and when they think it might shift in a direction. I doubt it will.
Yeah,
I'll turn it over.
That's helpful. Yeah, and before they answer, just one last question, and I'll be quiet for a little while. What will be the opportunity to readjust these percentages across the the lifetime of Measure T, or once they're approved, are we locked into those percentages for the full 30 years?
As we've discussed before, one of the things that we'll get to in the near future will be to start preparing the implementing guidelines for the measure. in those implementing guidelines, we will need to, if we continue with until ended by voters duration, so in other words, this measure won't end
Right.
until ended by voters, then we will be talking with you about looking at a specific increment of time to revisit the plan and make sure that it's still on track with what the voters and what the residents and what the businesses in the county want to see. And it will also need to be revisited to reflect new technologies or changes in transportation systems. So that could either be, every 10 years or every 15 years. I wouldn't recommend going beyond 15 years, but probably 10 or 15 years would be the increment that we would probably want to look at.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Jeffrey?
Hi, thanks. This is Jeffrey Wheeler, the Active Transportation Advocate, which I take to include transit. So one of the figures thrown out today was that 90% of the trips made in Madera County are made by car. So we have to look and say, why is this? So one reason is the lack of bicycle infrastructure. If 30 years ago we had invested a lot more in bicycle infrastructure, we would certainly see more people out riding bicycles. I have ridden my bicycle to the Madera County Transportation Commission, talked to the staff there, and no one there had ridden their bicycle. And I asked, well, why don't you ride your bicycle? Well, it's too frightening to ride on the road with cars. So to say we're just going to paint more stripes in the road and make those to be bike lanes does not make this environment comfortable enough for those cautious and concerned bicycle riders to get out there and ride bicycles. So to really increase the percent of trips made by bicycles, we need to have class 1 bike paths separate, and also class 4 protected bike lanes, either we say vertically or horizontally protected, so that bicyclists feel safe not having to ride on the same street as a car. Bike infrastructure, it's not even on the Madera County radar in terms of what needs there are to maintain bicycle infrastructure, because bike infrastructure lasts so long, and investment in bike infrastructure will not measurably increase the burden of maintenance. So I would say we should follow the good example of the county of San Luis Obispo and put at least 10% into active transportation and transit. Then we can perhaps begin to see a decrease in the number of vehicle miles traveled. And I don't see any need to augment clean technologies above 1.5%. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Leticia?
Yeah, so I kind of wanted to bring up how I understand that there's other grants for active transportation, transit, clean technology, et cetera. And MCT is the only way to leverage dollars for local street roads and regional projects. But I think we've seen historically that there hasn't been projects in disadvantaged communities. And so I think a concern for us is that those percentages need to be higher to kind of ensure that those projects are in disadvantaged communities. And also just to add and to continue pitching, the mobility study for La Viña was finished in 2019, and Measure T could totally fund that, and they haven't. So thank you.
Rod?
Yeah, just a question / comment. So on a previous slide, I just want to make sure I understood it. There is in the community and neighborhoods category the ability to spend those funds on active transportation and transit if needed. There's flexibility within those funds. So the hardline numbers that are being shown in those two categories could possibly be supplemented with that other category as well. Is that true?
Yes, when you go back to the programs that I started with, you'll see that there is a flexible category under community neighborhood streets and roads, which is local maintenance, local road improvements, and then regional streets and roads. There's also another category called flexible. That's right now that shows up as part of the local road improvements in the allocation. They can spend a certain portion of their funds, and we haven't decided what that portion is yet. We're trying to just allocate to each one of these major modes, and then we'll come back later and talk about how we might further allocate the funds to these sub-programs, but remaining sub-programs. But for flexible, they will have a fund, will have some percentage of funding that they can spend for whatever transportation purpose they desire. And it really depends on what their community wants. So if Chowchilla wants to, focus more on transit, they'll be able to do that. If the city of Madera wants to focus more on bikes and trails and pedestrian improvements, they can do that. And the same with the county. So right now we are showing these separated so that we can, we've separated out regional. That flexible amount is within the 61% in alternative one. Same with maintenance, and then same with other local road improvements. That's all 61%. So a portion of this would be flexible, and we'll have to decide, as one of our next tasks, what portion of it goes to flexible, what portion of it will go to maintenance, what portion of it will go to local streets and roads. And the regional is separated out. Because the reason regional is separated out here is because projects are very expensive. They're major highway and arterial projects in the county that connect various communities. So we want to be able to know what that amount is so that we can start to identify those projects. That's the reason it's broken out here.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that I did see that correctly. So there's flexibility, which at least for Chowchilla, that was one of our major desires and needs, was to have some flexibility.
Right.
Each community is different, and to have that flexibility is very important to us. And just to go back to reiterate what Frank mentioned earlier, that right now the surveying is indicative of wanting to have more for maintenance. So I guess I would lean more towards keeping the flexibility and having the ability to, if it's needed within our jurisdiction, to apply it to active transportation and transit. But that's just my opinion. I just want to make sure everybody knew there is other funds available in that category to spend on active transportation and transit. So,
yes, there are.
Thank you, Rod. Madeline?
Hi, everyone. So I wanted to raise a few concerns and questions. I guess most high level, one thing I'm failing to understand with these proposed alternatives is that throughout this process, we've been hearing that the public input outside of the steering committee is coming in large part from the outreach that's being done on the RTP update. And this doesn't seem to reflect what MCTC has been hearing from residents on the RTP update, because, for example, their survey results have shown that 41% of residents want to see an increase in bike and pedestrian options as a top 3 priority investment. And here we're seeing it be proposed as anywhere from 2.5 to 4%. And I understand what you're saying about there being flexibility in some of the roads categories, but I want to be clear that what it appears to look like is that would include adding on a bike lane to a capacity expanding road project, or adding on sidewalks to road projects, instead of having a category that's focused on making sure that these investments happen equitably across the county. So, for example, a lot of the road and capacity expanding projects that we've been hearing a lot about from the people on this committee have been freeway expansions, interchange expansions, and projects in southeastern Madera County that would in large part facilitate the sprawl development that's happening out there. Meanwhile, I don't know when the last time Measure T funds were used in Fairmead was. I really don't. And meanwhile, folks in Lavinia have been asking to get their mobility study implemented for years, as Leticia mentioned. So I think one of the key things that we need to take into account in asking for a higher percentage of Measure T funds to go towards active transportation and clean mobility projects is that when we tack them on to capacity expanding road projects that are already going to be taking place, those projects are happening in areas that are already seeing a disproportionate amount of investment. And we need to make sure that these investments are happening equitably. And that's something that I don't see reflected in this plan. So we can't support this as is. And in order for it to be consistent with the priorities of folks that we work with, there would need to be a lot higher percentage of active transportation, transit, and clean technology. And clean technology should not be competitive.
I would just have one response to your first comment, and that is that the surveys that were taken by MCTC for the Regional Transportation Plan, as well as those that are being taken for, or that are being currently underway for the Measure T, not scientific surveys. So they're not statistically accurate surveys. We have done an initial poll which provided us with a scientific, accurate, statistically accurate assessment with less than, I believe, a 3% deviation. And that did reflect what I showed at the beginning of the process, which is here. This was a scientific poll. What's being done by MCTC for the RTP, as well as what we're currently underway for Measure T, both in terms of the survey that's on the website, are not scientific polls. I should just make sure that's understood.
So which is it? Is the RTP outreach informing Measure T, or is it not?
Yes, it is, because one of the top 3 priorities from the RTP was for maintenance as well. With maintenance, I believe, active transportation, and I can't remember what the third one was, but I did look at that day, and maintaining the system was also one of the top 3 priorities from that survey itself.
So as a facilitator, I know we want to try to hear from everybody before we have others chime in twice. So if you've...
So we'll do Jason and Jared and then Tim.
Yeah, so I know, Brett, we wanted to hear from everybody. So if there are others that I know Tim has had a lot of time to talk, and not that I can hear.
That's why I said we're going to go Jason, then Jared, and then Tim.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. So yeah, I think it's important to remember that, a lot of Madera County's a disadvantaged area. Is comprised of disadvantaged areas, including a city of Chowchilla. Chowchilla is a disadvantaged community as well. As a public works director, we often get, a lot of questions from the public and the people that we represent related to their concerns. And by far the biggest concern that we receive from our residents, our constituents, is a desire to maintain the roads that we have, to fix the roads that we have. While there is some desire for active transportation and stuff, if it can be incorporated into projects, that's always appreciated. But the biggest thing that we always receive, or that most of the time is, at least 90% of the time, is, when is this road being fixed? When are we going to do this road? And so we should really take that into consideration, that, each area and disadvantaged area really does have different needs, as Rod was saying. And our needs here in Chowchilla are not necessarily the same as those represented by Leadership Council. But I just wanted to point out that where we're hearing the need at is on local streets and roads.
Thank you, Jason. Jared?
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. And I would just, I was going to basically echo what Jason was saying is we have a large area of the county, many other areas of the county that are considered disadvantaged. And we do serve the entire population of the county. And by far the number one complaints and concerns we get from citizens are the conditions of the road. I certainly appreciate that the active transportation is something that folks would like to have and want to see. And I think we, as Keith mentioned, we to the extent we can, and we try to incorporate those elements into either maintenance projects or improvement projects as we're able to do them. Um, and I would just say that, Madeline, I'm happy to pull the numbers for Lavina and Fairmead and show you how much money's been spent in those communities over the last several years, because they have not been ignored. We spent CMAQ money. We spent a lot of money out there. Lavina, Avenue 9 was overlaid. All those streets in there were maintained just recently. So I don't think that's an accurate statement that no money is going to those communities.
When was the last time that Measure T was used in Fairmead?
I don't have the exact date of that, but we can pull numbers on funding that's been going to those communities for sure.
That'd be great. Thanks.
Tim?
Yeah, thanks, Supervisor. And I think Jared and Georgina, you kind of answered it. I was just trying to assess the percentages for active transportation and transit against what we are hearing from community members in terms of any polling and surveying. And I'm thinking about, well, let me ask Georgina, will these percentages, I'm assuming they'll be available to the public, and they'll be a part of, the public's assessment of whether or not they want to support the renewal of Measure T. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, the investment plan will be included in the ballot. So they'll be able to see all of the detail related to the measure.
Okay. And so then based on what you've heard and seen, and I don't know if the initial polling that was shared with us, do you think this will meet the voters' expectations and desires?
Based upon the existing poll that we have right now, I would say yes. Based upon the questions that were asked about each of the modes and the priority for each of the modes, I would say yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
And to kind of wrap up this before we come to with someone having a hopefully a motion on one of these two, we all attend community meetings in various different capacities, and like I said in the chat, there's not a single meeting I go to, even water meetings, where people are bringing up the roads. I mean, at Thanksgiving, my dad gives me tells me why aren't we need the roads to be better. At Rolling Hills, the Ranchos, Lavinia, Fairmead, Ripperton, Eastern Arcola. This is not a socioeconomic. Everybody is upset with the roads, and even if we did, if we did everything in active transportation and transit, and there's no road for the buses to drive on, or if we have a beautiful bike lane, but the cars have to drive into that bike lane because there's potholes on the road, that's not going to be a very safe way for people who are walking or taking their bike to pass safely. It's one of those things we need to treat what the major issue is, which is the local streets and roads and their PCI, and before we can start doing a lot of these other things that we want to do, that we are going to continue to do on a regular basis with active transportation and transit. Jeffrey, you made a good point that 90% travels, and I had the same exact question in my head. Is that because no one wants to, or is it because it's not the availability isn't there? And that's probably it's probably a combination of both. but when the availability is there, maybe more people will want to. So I get that. And I think, you know, by bumping these up is important, but this Measure T is not, as we see, even with Measure T, isn't going to solve everything, even for the local streets and roads, even if it was at 100%. I think we probably need this as a, until ended by voters. We'll probably need to go out for another $0.25 just to even get to what we need to do for a short period of time on the maintenance of local streets and roads, or something that mirrors this. That's maybe a 20-year one that we can actually accomplish this. Then once we get everything to a PCI that is commensurate with safely passing for both vehicles, pedestrians, and bicyclists, and transit-oriented development, then that one can go away. But you know, I just think that you know, we need to move forward on one of these two alternatives. Jeffrey will take your question, and if anybody's willing to put themselves out there on one of these two, I'd appreciate it. Jeffrey?
Thank you, Supervisor Frieder. When we look at the alternatives, I think it might be useful if the maintenance costs were separated out. I mean, this is the thing that we're all in agreement with, that we want roads maintained. And I think it's something that's going to sell Measure T to the voters. Why don't we have it separated out to say maintenance?
It will be. We're just trying to get to an overall allocation day so that we can move on and start to look at those regional projects. But we will, each of the programs and sub-programs, so all of these sub-programs that we have up here. So under community and neighborhood streets and roads, we have 4 sub-programs. Regional will be separated out, but these other 3 will be separated out once we get past today. We will come back with an allocation of that 61% or 57% or whatever you end up here with, how it should be allocated to these 3 subcategories. For transit, it's all the transit. It would just go to the transit agencies. And then for active transportation, that's a local allocation issue. So that would be allocated based on population. And then for clean transportation, new technologies, that would be a competitive program. So there won't be any specific allocation to any sub-programs, but it would be a competitive allocation. Applications would be submitted by the local agencies as well as others to implement these various different types of eligible projects. But we will be coming back to you specifically with an allocation proposal for these 3 different sub-programs.
Matt Trieber, and then the mayor. Actually, let's take the mayor first, Matt.
Very kind of you, Supervisor. I could have waited for Matt.
I know, but as I was saying it, I knew Matt would let you jump in front of him. That's the kind of guy he is.
All right. Yeah, well, you're asking for input. So I would like to chime in that I'd like to see alternative number 2 go into play. I really would like to see more of a increase in percentage in active and transit. But I'm not hearing that from the rest of the folks. So I would at least like to go with alternative number 2. Thank you.
Thank you. And that is a motion, Mr. Trieber.
I'll second. I was just saying I was ready to make a motion.
All right, so we have.
Chair
Yes,
Frazier.
Yes, Councilmember.
I just wanted to, just so that we have a formal motion. I'm not sure if Mayor Garcia is the alternate or is he, if not, then I would move on that motion that we approve alternative 2.
Look at that teamwork from the city of Madera. They're making a co-motion. So whatever way is legal. And Matt, are you good with that second?
Yes, sir.
All right. So we'll do this through, is there any opposed?
Leadership Council is opposed to both of them, actually.
Social Services Transportation Advisory Council is also opposed.
All right.
The active transportation advocate is opposed and would like a third alternative.
All right, so that is there anybody else opposed? That's 3 that I can count. All right, looks like that passes, correct? All right.
Thank you, everyone. Next item on the agenda.
Can jump in for public engagement.
For public engagement, polling status.
Great. And I think we have some slides. Yes. So Alex, TBDH props and measures, along with Charles Heath here as well. Just going to run through some slides and give you an update, and then what's coming down the pipeline for outreach. Accomplished to date, we had worked with True North Research to conduct the scientific survey that went out to voters, and we've seen those results periodically through a lot of the presentations during these meetings. We conducted interviews with all of you to help form the steering committee, and we've been going at this for a few months now, if you can believe it or not. We've distributed an online survey to stakeholders who are not members of the steering committee. We recognize that, we can't have a committee of hundreds of people. So we did give other stakeholders the chance to give feedback about their transportation funding priorities in the county. We developed some Measure T documents to, kind of remind people what Measure T has done, what it does do for the county, and we provided you all with talking points, FAQs, and a fact sheet. And those are all on keepmaderamoving.org online. And we developed messaging on Measure T accomplishments and messaging related to the proposed renewal. Next slide, please. We've been assisting in updating the MCTC website so that it's up to date with Measure T accomplishments and the planning for a renewal measure. That includes if someone goes to keepmaderamoving.org, they are rerouted to the steering committee webpage. I'm going
Councilman Rodriguez, I think you're still, there you go.
All right. Thank you. We did produce and we sent a mailer to all residents that went out early this week. You should have received that in your mailbox if you are a resident of Madera County. Oh, there it is. Thank you, Supervisor. There has been feedback coming in via the online survey, and then there is a tear-off survey if people don't want to hop online, and the survey is available in Spanish and English. And we'll continue to keep updating keepmaderamoving.org. So upcoming outreach, we are working with True North Research, the pollster, to develop and field a tracking poll on Measure T so that we can come back and report those results to all of you. And we'll continue to outreach to key stakeholders to seek their advice about Measure T, and conduct meetings with key stakeholders and opinion leaders within the community after the development of the draft investment plan. And as part of the survey that went out in the mailer, we did ask people if they wanted to stay up to date on Measure T and what's going on, and we are tracking that. So we'll develop emails working with MCTC to help everyone keep informed about the process. And as we spoke about earlier in the meeting, we are continuing to coordinate with the RTP outreach process to update residents on Measure T and funding in Madera County.
That concludes the public outreach update. Brett?
All right. See any questions? So we'll move on to the next item.
Okay, in terms of the schedule, as you can see here, I'll focus in, if I can, on April, May, and June. So we're here in March, of course, March 31st. We have finalized the allocations to the renewal programs. At our next meeting, which will be April 14th, We will be looking to initiate discussion of the regional project priorities, those projects to address the regional connectivity and enhance safety between the communities. That'll be our major focus at the next meeting. The meeting following that, we'll be looking to review the poll results, and that will likely be on April 21st. And then on April 28th, we have added some meetings in here, so that's why I'm going through this. We're looking at initiating development of the implementing guidelines, and that'll take us 4 or 3 meetings. We may not need all 4 meetings in May. We may not need the 3 meetings in April. It just depends on how we get through these regional priorities. And we may just come back in May with 4 meetings and skip 3 meetings in April. We'll just have to determine that at a later time. But there we're looking at getting those implementing guidelines in place by 2nd meeting in May or 3rd meeting in May, and then initiating review of the actual investment plan, renewal plan with the committee. And that will take, we anticipate that'll take 3 meetings, 2 or 3 meetings. And we need to be finished by at least mid-June to late June. From there, we will move over to the, well, I can't, once I've done that, I can't get it back. So there we go. Oh, let me go back to it. There we go. Whoa. Okay, so there we are. So in June, we'll finish up with the final plan. And then in July, we're looking for MCTA board approval, July 20th, Board of Supervisors, ballot approval in July or August, and we need to submit the ballot language by August 12th. So that is the schedule as of now. We'll let you know exactly how many meetings we will need in May and June and even April. It's just going to depend on how these items go as we discuss them with the committee. Any questions? Okay. So our next meeting date is now scheduled for April 14th. That will be between 1:30 and 3:30. We will send to you a calendar invite if one has not already gone out, and then you will receive a Zoom invite 1 week prior, and then a day prior, and then 1 hour prior. So those will be for your panelist links to actually join the meeting. And that's all I have, unless Tricia, do you have any additional staff items?
No, Gina, I don't at this time.
And then after this, we have the public comment for items not on the agenda. Yep. All right. Any public comment on items not on the agenda? All right. With that, with a record 3:04, I will call this meeting adjourned.
Thank you so much, everyone.